Hypertension in the male pelvic floor is very common, and it is one of the main contributors of premature ejaculation, of being stuck in a sympathetic fight or flight state. It also contributes to erectile dysfunction and weak erections. So in this video, I'm going to address these things. I'm going to address the male pelvic floor, how you can balance your pelvic floor, what's causing these tension issues, and how you can use this information to dramatically improve your sexual health, your sex life, overcome premature ejaculation, have much better erections. I'm Jonathan White. I'm here to help you master your sexual energy so you can manifest your ideal life. If you like the content, make sure you subscribe to support the channel and get my free ejaculation control course through the link in the video description below. So the pelvic floor is obviously very important to our sexual health and our sexual function, as this area directly relates to the blood flow and the hormonal release in this area of our body. So it's a crucial component to sexual health and also sexual performance in men. The ability to have an erection, the ability to enjoy sexual pleasure, the ability to have control over your ejaculation, the ability to be able to enjoy sex for a duration instead of just ejaculating immediately. But it seems that the majority of men have these patterns of hypertension in the pelvic floor. And I don't want to repeat myself too much because I've talked about this in other videos. I made a lot of videos on this subject, but just to reiterate what is important to know, that when the pelvic floor is engaged, when the musculature, the tissues of the pelvic floor are tensed, this is activating your sympathetic nervous system. It's directly stimulating the nerves, sending signals through your sympathetic nervous system, and this also correlates to your ejaculation response, which is a function of that sympathetic nervous system. So basically, the ejaculatory release is a buildup of tension around the prostate in the pelvic floor region, and once it hits a maximum level of tension, the body triggers the ejaculatory release and you ejaculate. And so when men have hypertension in the pelvic floor, they're essentially already right at the edge of ejaculating, and they're already at this baseline of tension. So just a bit more stimulation pushes them over the edge. And how this relates to erectile dysfunction and weak erections is that I'm not saying that this is always the cause of erectile dysfunction. It can be many things, but this does seem to be a common contributor to erection issues in men, especially if you're healthy in most areas of your life, but you still have erection issues. So what's happening with the pelvic floor tension is that you understand that the erection response in the body, an erection is formed by a healthy flow of blood in and out of the penis. And what happens when you have all this pelvic floor tension is all these muscles are engaged and they're pulling blood into them. And it's also creating constriction. It's constriction from blood freely flowing into the penis. It gets lodged in this pelvic floor region. So it disrupts the natural physiology of the erection. And this is experienced as weak erections or an inability to become erect. So for these pelvic floor issues, it doesn't help that on top of this, men are often doing Keal exercises. And it's understandable because if you do some research on this, like if you Google exercises for premature ejaculation, exercise for erectile dysfunction, what you're going to find often is Keal exercises will help with this. And I'm going to go more into why that's a terrible idea for most men and actually makes the issue worse. And especially how Kegels relate to your erection quality and how that's often a trap of, if I just squeeze my pelvic floor, it pumps more penis into my blood and my erection's better. That's a sign of an unhealthy pelvic floor. And I'll get back into that. So first of all, let's talk about the root cause of this pelvic floor tension. Inherently, it's usually just a stress response. There's tension in the mind, there's tension in the body. And the pelvic floor seems to be a major area that men hold stress in. They hold tension in here. And I think there's often a relation to shame and vulnerability around this area of the body, because from a young age, we're often taught in this modern world that, this area is dirty, it's shameful, there's something wrong with it. And so we tend to retract our consciousness from this area, and we tend to develop this protection here, which is experienced as physical tension. This makes us more numb. It makes the area not function as well, and it creates layers of tension there. And there's many other reasons as well. I made a more comprehensive video about the various factors of pelvic floor tension, but this is the most common thing: stress, mental, emotional tension and stress held in the pelvic floor. And it simply becomes, basically you're doing the squeezing in your pelvic floor throughout the day, just in the background, without even realizing it. And it's disrupting your blood flow. It's disrupting the function of the pelvic floor and the sexual organs. Now, other things that can contribute to pelvic floor tension are spending too much time sitting down. This is another very common thing because we live in a world that has become very sedentary. People spend more time sitting and less time moving their bodies, allowing the tissues to move and glide as they're meant to, and things become very stagnant. And it's like if you've ever spent all day standing up, if you work at a restaurant or something like that, your feet get really, really sore and tense and tight at the end of the day. Well, The same thing with your pelvic floor. When you're sitting on it, all your weight is resting on it. You're not moving your body very much. It gets very blocked up. It gets very tense. And you essentially develop these like knots, these muscle and fascia constrictions in your tissues, and that gets lodged. So that's another common cause. It can also be inflammation from poor diet, from toxicity in your environment, having digestive issues, intestinal issues, can all contribute to pelvic floor tension. So what I'm going to talk about now is how you can release these pelvic floor hypertension patterns and transition into having a healthy pelvic floor and a better sexual function. But I want to address Kegels right now because this is an important issue when it comes to this subject, and there's a lot of misunderstanding around the pelvic floor in general. So once again, Kegels are often a very commonly, I don't know if prescribed is the right word, but are recommended exercises for men who have any sort of sexual issue. Weak erections, do Kegels. Premature ejaculation, do Kegels. Want a bigger dick, do Kegels. And you can watch my video where I explain why I think Kegels are bullshit. And this is probably already clear by now, but the reason why Kegels are not a good idea for most men is because most men already have a baseline of tension in the pelvic floor. If you have hypertension, you're essentially already holding a Kegel all day, 24/7 in that region. So to add more tension by doing Kegel exercises is just going to exacerbate it. It's just going to make it worse. And this is what I have seen happen to many men. It happened to me. I was studying these sexual practices. A lot of teachers in the Tantra, the Taoist sexual practices, they encourage Keal exercises and they encourage the squeezing of the pelvic floor to control ejaculation and to experience non-ejaculatory orgasms. And to a certain extent, it works, but what it also does is make you much more sensitive to an ejaculatory buildup. It makes your penis more sensitive. It makes it much more difficult to control your ejaculation, to just have sex without constantly being on the edge of ejaculating, because you are further ingraining a stress response to sexual arousal, further ingraining the sympathetic fight or flight stress response pathway in your nervous system to sexual stimulation when you're doing Kegels all the time, and especially when you're squeezing your pelvic floor during sex, which a lot of men do as well. And let's talk about erections here, because this is another important thing. The question a lot of men have at this point is, well, if I don't squeeze my pelvic floor during sex, then I can't hold an erection and it goes away. So Kegels make my erection stronger. That's another common misunderstanding, is that doing a Kegel makes your erection stronger. And it's a bit of a superficial thing, because technically, yes, if you're becoming aroused, if your penis is becoming erect, if you squeeze your pelvic floor muscles, it pumps some blood and holds it in your penis. So in effect, it does initially pump up your erection a bit more and make it feel stronger. But as I mentioned before, this is a sign that the natural physiology of erection, your pelvic floor, is out of balance, because a healthy human body, a healthy male body, can have a very strong erection sustained for, a pretty long period of time without requiring any squeezing in the pelvic floor. If you have to do that in the first place, it means that something's out of balance already. So this tends to make the issue worse over time. It makes the issue worse by, first of all, making you more sensitive to sexual stimulation. So it strengthens that ejaculatory buildup from that tension, that squeezing. And also your erections will often get worse and worse over time as blood flow becomes more and more constricted, because you're adding more and more layers of tension instead of allowing blood to flow freely. So it's important to know that when you are transitioning into holding a relaxed pelvic floor throughout the day, and especially during sex, which is very important, we'll talk more about that, there is an adjustment period to where your erections will feel initially worse because your body's rebalancing. You're going through a transition phase of requiring tension to force blood to stay in the penis versus allowing everything to free up and re-strengthening those pathways of blood flow in and out of your penis, which over time leads to much better erections, maybe than you've ever had. When I transitioned into releasing pelvic floor tension and no longer squeezing my pelvic floor during sex, I had the best erections I had ever had, since my teenage years, and sustaining an erection no longer became an issue for me, which it had been at certain times earlier in my life. Okay, so let's get down more to the practical terms here. How to overcome these pelvic floor tension patterns. So this is mostly a theoretical video, more of the background, the context, information that is important because you need to know these things to know what action to take. So this video is not going to be a tutorial on the actual exercises and practices, but I have other videos on them. So I will reference those here when I'm talking about these things. The most important thing, number one, is to start managing stress in your life. Obviously, avoiding unnecessary stress. Do I really need to be on social media for 3 hours a day? Do I really need to be, taking all this excessive baggage into my mind and my emotional body? You know what I mean? So just taking those steps to release the stressors from your life. But ultimately, it really comes down to balancing your nervous system and your body's capacity to handle stress, which means eating healthy, getting sleep, resting, spending some time in nature, having some quiet time, meditating, drinking water, avoiding alcohol, drugs, and substances. Basically living a healthy lifestyle is one of the best things you can do to improve your body's capacity to handle stress, and you will be less likely to be in a constant stress response. So that's first and foremost, is adjust your lifestyle a little bit. Proper breathing. This is really important as well, because another thing that happens when people are stuck in a stress response is their breathing becomes very poor quality, really shallow breathing up in the chest. There's a strong connection between the diaphragm and what we could say the lower diaphragm. The pelvic floor is kind of like the lower diaphragm of the body. So when you loosen up and free the upper diaphragm with proper breathing, it has a strong connection with freeing up the pelvic floor as well. So breathing abdominally, full breaths from deep in your belly, pulling the belly in towards the spine as you exhale. Learn how to breathe abdominally. There's plenty of tutorials. I've made videos on this as well. And basically practice doing this as much as you can. Spend 5 or 10 minutes a day just doing some breath work, just doing like full, deep abdominal breathing. And it will go a long way in releasing some of these tension patterns and constrictions and freeing up your pelvic floor. And another thing that I encourage you to focus on is simply relaxing your pelvic floor throughout the day. Like, start to tune in. This becomes a way to ground yourself, because when we're busy, when we're stressed out, we're often not paying attention to what's happening within our body. We're completely out here in the external world, and we get out of our center. We get unbalanced. Our nervous system becomes dysregulated. We get stressed out. And so start to pay attention throughout the day. Just tune into your pelvic floor and just see if you can relax a little bit. Just, okay, let me take a breath. Relax my pelvic floor. And what helps with this is to think of that relaxation coming from your anus, from your butthole, just like this. Think of it as like a flower blossoming and opening. That sounds, silly, but seriously, it's this deep release of the anal area, of the whole pelvic floor, of even the belly, just this, And when you do that, you automatically feel more open, a little more vulnerable for sure, because it's a self-defense mechanism, the squeezing, and you feel more grounded and present with where you're at. So this becomes a really great way to tune in. And I also encourage you to, anytime you're having sex or masturbating, do not squeeze the pelvic floor. At least do your best to not squeeze your pelvic floor. There's more sexual kung fu techniques that I teach to help overcome this involuntary squeezing response to sexual stimulation. But the simplest thing is simply pay attention and don't squeeze the pelvic floor during sex and sexual stimulation. Because if you're like me, in your teenage years, when you were masturbating, you develop the response to squeeze the pelvic floor in coordination with sexual stimulation, because it brings you closer to ejaculation. Another thing that's going to really help you to free up your pelvic floor, release hypertension, is to mobilize the body, mobilize the tissues. The pelvic floor is meant to function. It's often treated as like the standalone thing, which, kind of coming back to the Keal model, like, yeah, just do Kegels, just isolate and strengthen those pelvic floor muscles. That'll cure everything for you. But what's often misunderstood is that the pelvic floor is actually meant to function in relation with the surrounding muscle groups. And what often happens when you spend too much time sitting down is that your stabilizing muscles become weak. Your postural muscles become weak, and the pelvic floor actually takes over as a stabilizer for your body, which it is not meant to do, which causes it to be constantly engaged and overworked and super tense. So when I say mobilize your body, I mean do exercise, move your body. It comes back to the sedentary lifestyle. Try to move more movement, proper posture. You want to teach your body to function as a unit, because when you spend too much time sitting down, too much time in your head, the body doesn't function as well. It loses its ability to communicate with the various regions. The body's meant to function as a unit. And when your pelvic floor isn't communicating with your core muscles, with your hamstrings, your glutes, your thighs, things get out of whack and you develop serious imbalances in your postural system and just the ability of the tissues and muscles to engage and unengage, to contract and release. So exercising, whether that's like, weight training, strength training with good form, doing some cardiovascular exercise with good form. Qigong and yoga are really great for teaching your body to connect as a unit, to engage and unengage properly. It can go a long way in rebalancing your pelvic floor and making sure that everything's functioning properly in your body, so you don't develop areas of extreme tension where these opposing muscle groups, one is overactive and one is underactive. I have a really great daily routine that will really help you with this. It's a 10-minute pelvic balancing routine. And if you do that every day, it's going to help wake up your stabilizing muscles. It helps you with hip pain, knee pain, things like that, and really good for your pelvic floor. So that would be a really solid morning routine or evening routine to do. One of the things that was most helpful for me in balancing my pelvic floor was doing a bit of a stretch routine that focuses on the pelvic floor and the surrounding areas to really mobilize and open up the hips. It's not really just stretching, it's lengthening and releasing releasing, kind of lengthening out the tissues and allowing them to release, because just a forceful stretch is not going to do it. It's this process of both opening up the tissues and also breathing into the space and allowing it to contract and expand to engage and release that can really free up your pelvic floor. So I have a really great guided 12-minute pelvic floor stretching routine. If you have hypertension in your pelvic floor, premature ejaculation, erection issues, I definitely recommend that you do this routine. Ideally every day, but even 3 to 4 times a week is going to make a tremendous difference. And then I want to talk a little bit about trigger point and releasing the tissues. So this is kind of like an external massage work. And this is something that you can do yourself, certainly. And it's also great to have, a skilled massage therapist or physical therapist do for you as well. But basically, the most simple thing is to use a tennis ball or a lacrosse ball, which is a bit more firm. And you actually place it underneath your perineum, underneath your pelvic floor, sitting on a chair. And you just sit on it, allow it to sink into the soft area of the perineum and just breathe deeply. Do about 8 to 10 breaths, just sitting, breathing into it, allowing it to press up into those tissues. And you can move it around a little bit, take a few more breaths, move it around. That will really free up your pelvic floor. And also working with surrounding muscles, like the psoas can be really connected to pelvic floor tension. I like to get into the psoas with my fingers or an external tool to release that as well as the adductors. The inner thigh muscles are often very strongly connected with pelvic floor tension. So some trigger point release on those regions can really help free up the pelvic floor. Some men who have really, really serious hypertension patterns may choose to go to a pelvic floor physical therapist, and that's certainly a great option. I've never done this personally, but I know people who have, and they got great benefit from it. But for the average man, just doing these things at home, these stretch routines, the tissue release, all the things I've talked about, is going to go a long way towards rebalancing your pelvic floor. And one last point I want to mention here that I don't see talked about a lot, but it is very important, is your feet. I highly encourage you to wear minimal flat-soled shoes. Most shoes that we wear have a lifted heel, and this completely throws off the alignment of your body. The spine arches to compensate for this unnatural curve it creates in your system. And for most men, this creates a strong anterior pelvic tilt, which puts a lot of pressure and tension in your pelvic floor. So by wearing shoes, it's called zero drop, where there's no raised heel, minimal type shoes. I like Zero shoes. It's my favorite brand of shoes I wear. It's pretty much the only shoes I wear. And also shoes that allow your toes to spread out, because shoes constrict the toes inward. It compresses the feet and the fascia tissue. The whole body is connected to the feet. So when the feet are out of balance, they're constricted, they're raised in unnatural positions all day. It actually creates tension along your entire body. And the pelvic floor is definitely an area where this tension goes into. So fixing your feet I haven't seen a lot of people talk about this, but it is another important area to address when balancing your pelvic floor. So I personally use minimal shoes. I never wear raised heel shoes, and I use toe spacers, which help to stretch back out the toes and create more space and freedom in the feet. And I found a lot of benefit to my pelvic floor, my overall vitality from doing so. So just like anything, it's about having more awareness of this. And again, the most important thing is that you're taking action on it. So working on, resolving stress factors in your life, improving your health, getting your lifestyle together so you can cope with stress, doing meditation, qigong, yoga, exercising, moving your body, doing the pelvic floor stretching, breathing properly, allowing yourself some downtime and some relaxation. All of these things are going to help you over time release these pelvic floor hypertension issues. And this is a huge part of overcoming premature ejaculation for men, and it's also going to dramatically improve your erection quality as well. So I know I dropped a lot in this video. Let me know if you have any questions or if there's certain points I made that you'd like to hear me expand more on in a future video. And make sure you hit the like button to support the channel. Have a great rest of your day, my friend.